Hey guys, welcome back to another F1 Fantasy video, and in today's video I'm going to be going over how well my team did using the limitless chip in Austria, how well my usual team would have done just in case any of you didn't use a chip, to show you how well I did there. I'll then be looking at the key price changes and the key drivers and constructors that you'll want to look at ahead of the Silverstone Grand Prix. I will then show you the teams that I would pick for Silverstone, and there's a team for everyone. Even if you just started and you've only got 100 million in the bank, there's a team for everyone I've got ready. And then finally, I'll go over the drivers and constructors I would not pick in any case, because some drivers won't come up in this video, and then at the end I'll explain why. So hey, before we get into all of that, remember to like and subscribe. Join my league. We've got 85 people in it at the minute. I'm really excited about that. Let's get to 100. Join my Twitter and join my Discord server if you want more in-depth talk outside of videos about F1 Fantasy, because some things do come up after these videos, but there's not enough to make another video about. So hey, let's get straight into it. So first up, let's talk about how well my team did using Limitless. And as you can see, I got 436 points overall using the Limitless. Max Verstappen was my best driver, getting 112 points as I used the 2 times on him. Yes, you could have used extra DRS, which is fine. I'll be using that in Belgium, which is the next sprint race weekend. Basically, it was one or the other. You'll be using both in a sprint race weekend for Max. That's when you get the most points. So if you used either Limitless or extra DRS bonus, you would have done well this weekend. As you can see, I also had Alonso 28 points, Perez 51 points, Hamilton 31 points, Leclerc 32 points, Red Bull 112 points, Mercedes 70 points. Now, I could have got a few more points if I picked Ferrari and Sainz instead of Alonso and Mercedes, but overall, I'm very happy with how that went. It was a few extra points. I'll show you where I sit in the world now. I sit in the top 80,000. And for that race weekend, I sit 26,845th place using my Limitless. So I would call that a very good race weekend. Now, let's get on to how my usual team would have done. So my usual team of Verstappen, Perez, Stroll, Alonso, and Zhou, Red Bull, and Aston Martin would have got me 401 points, which is very respectable. And now, the reason I'm still using Zhou is because he got 10 points last weekend. It was pretty good for him. It was more than Tsunoda got, who is his rival at the minute. Less than Sargent, but I'll talk about that because I don't know if he's still a driver you'd want to get yet. But Verstappen you have to have in your team. Perez same. Alonso, he's dirt cheap. He's rising in prices though, which I will be talking about later in this video. Stroll, the same thing. He did better than his rival Gasly at the minute in F1 Fantasy, so very happy with that team. And if you didn't use Limitless, you would have only got 35 less points this weekend, considering you would have saved yourself a chip and you could use it later on in the season. Either way, if I'd used my usual team or my Limitless team, I would have done well this weekend. So now let's get into the key price changes and key drivers and constructors ahead of Silverstone. So again, I want to first start off with Logan Sargent. He had a great weekend, getting 19 points throughout the weekend. Sprint precisions gained 2, sprint overtake bonuses 6. Race position gained 5, race overtake bonuses 6. So as you can see, the power of race overtakes is ridiculous in F1 Fantasy, giving him 19 points, boosting his value by 0.5 mil. 4 million is still dirt cheap for Sargent, so I'm happy with him. He's actually got back into the, well, technically he's on 0 season points now, but if he carries on like this, he could be a good differential to bring in before his price changes even more. Then we get onto Piastri and Norris, who both had a 0.5 mil upgrade in their price. Again, I thought they were too pricey before. They are definitely now too pricey now, so steer clear of them. Like, yes, they both had good weekends, with Piastri getting 20 points and Norris getting 29 points. But when Piastri's 7 million for 20 points and Norris is 11.4 million, all around the Alonso and Stroll price, so you'd have to get rid of Alonso and Stroll to bring them in, it's just not worth it at those prices. So realistically, I don't really get why they've gone up in price. They should have just stayed the same, because they haven't actually improved that much. Then we get onto Albon, who's gone 0.5 mil up again. He had a decent weekend in Austria, getting 11 points, but when Zhou for 4.7 million is getting 10 points, and that's his main rival on the value-wise, there's no point in getting Albon. I don't get how Albon, who got 11 points, went up by 0.5 mil, and Zhou, who got 10 points, didn't go up. But again, Albon, too expensive for what he was. He was too expensive last weekend at 5.9 million. Now he's definitely too expensive because he's verging on, you'd have to replace Stroll with Albon. There is no need to replace Stroll with definitely Albon. At least let it be Gasly. Same thing with Magnussen. He got 13 points in the weekend. Not a bad tally of points. But then when you remember now that he's gone up 0.5 mil and he's 6.9 million, again, he's in that Stroll conversation. Would you get rid of Stroll for Magnussen? No, considering Stroll got around double the points to Magnussen, more than double than Albon. I really don't see why their prices are going up. It's a little bit ridiculous. So steer clear of Albon and Magnussen. And then onto Stroll and Alonso. Now you really need to bring those two into your team. I can't say this enough because Alonso's gone up 0.5 mil and Stroll. So Stroll is 8.6 million. And Alonso is now 10.9 million. Alonso scored 28 points this weekend and Stroll got 25. Very good points. Literally around the points McLaren got. Norris got 28. Piastri got 20. Same points as McLaren. That are around the same price as the McLaren boys. So it just doesn't make sense why you wouldn't bring them in your team, especially as Alonso's price is moving up every weekend. Same with Stroll's now. I wouldn't be surprised if we get to the summer break and Alonso's around 12-13 mil and Stroll's around 10 mil. You have to have them in your team before you can't afford it anymore. And then I think the final thing I want to talk about with the key drivers and the price changes is my outrage about Tsunoda points. So he's valued at 5.1 million. He hasn't gone up or down. And he got 4 points this weekend. I think it's ridiculous how he has not dropped back down to Zhou's price, considering Zhou has about 20 odd points more than Tsunoda now. Had a better race weekend last season. So how is Zhou valued at less than Tsunoda? It's ridiculous. Either Tsunoda needs to go drop down to Zhou's price again, or Zhou needs to go up to Tsunoda's points. Because I feel like I've been ripped of that 0.4 million driver value, even though I've chosen the right driver. And it just feels a bit weird how Tsunoda's price hasn't changed and Zhou's price haven't changed, considering they both did good and bad enough for their prices to move. And yes, I know it also has to do with people picking them, but Tsunoda's only got a 7% picked. So how the hell is he not lower? I don't know. Because also, I would not be buying Tsunoda for 5.1 million. It's a bit of a joke. But yeah, that sums up the key price changes ahead of Silverstone and the key drivers and constructors you want to look out for or not look out for on your radar because of price movements. So now let's get into the teams I would pick ahead of Silverstone. Now, like last weekend, I think I've got around 5 options to choose from. And realistically, option 1 is the team I would have had for Austria if I hadn't have used my limitless, which is Verstappen, Perez, Alonso, Stroll, Zhou, Red Bull and Aston Martin. Realistically, this is the best team you can have at the minute if you've got the price for it. Even having Tsunoda isn't better at the minute. Verstappen must have. I know it's expensive, but he's getting you the most points every weekend. Perez, same thing. Even when he qualifies 15th, he'll get you the same amount of points as Verstappen because he'll just overtake everyone and get like 20 odd race overtake bonuses into 3rd, like he did in Austria. And then Alonso and Stroll, like I said, with their prices moving, you need to get on them before they get too expensive because they've been moving up all season. They've barely moved down in price. And Zhou, like I've said, I think he's the best value for money driver at the minute. I think he's better than Sargent, Tsunoda, and Hülkenberg. Those would be the 5th drivers I'd be looking at for your F1 Fantasy. So then option 2 is the same team with Verstappen, Perez, Alonso, Stroll, Red Bull, Aston Martin, but the differentials, which I just spoke about with the Tsunoda, Hülkenberg, and Sargent. Because all 3 of them, realistically, if you had them in your team, you're still going to do well because the 5th driver shootout's only going to change your points between around 5 to 10 points every weekend. Yes, it's important if you're up there fighting for like the top 100,000. Everyone needs to be getting those little edges in points. But on a broader range, if you have one of those 4 drivers in your team with the option that I just told you, you'll have a great team. So I highly recommend option 1 and 2. Then option 3, which I'm slowly starting to lose hope in, because I think Stroll's going to move up in price and overtake Gasly soon, would be to replace Stroll with Gasly. And then obviously you still have the whole Zhou thing where who do you want to pick, Zhou, Tsunoda, Hülkenberg or Sargent. And you could make these teams if you've got the value, if you've been playing it well. So I think Gasly is still a good option, but Stroll is just a much more reliable source of points because even when he has a bad weekend, he'll get position overtakes because Aston Martin will always be fast enough to at least challenge for the top 10, even with Stroll. So when he qualifies 15th or whatever, he will overtake people. It will happen. But again, like I said, I think it's a differential. I still wouldn't go for Gasly over Stroll, but it's not a terrible choice. So that is option 3. Then option 4 is the Ferrari differential. Now, if you really want Ferrari because it looks like they're doing very well at the minute, and you're like, okay, it's time to move on from Aston Martin, which I don't think it is yet, but it's worth having a look at and keeping your eye on, would be Verstappen, Stroll, Alonso, Sargent, Hulkenberg, Red Bull and Ferrari. And basically the reason you'd have to bring in Sargent and Hulkenberg is just because Ferrari is so much more expensive as a constructor compared to Aston Martin. And that's why it still makes sense to keep Perez and Zhou instead of Sargent and Hulkenberg, just because they, I don't think, are good enough yet, and Ferrari aren't making enough of a points haul more than Aston Martin to cover your Perez points. So keep that in mind. But if you want Ferrari, same with Mercedes, although you'd probably have to get rid of Alonso and bring in someone like Gasly, then those would be the differentials. So keep an eye on them because they might be what you want to go to later on in the season if one of the Ferraris or Mercedes is actually challenging for wins. But at the minute, it's not worth it, and it won't be worth it for quite a while. And then finally, option 5, I always do this for newcomers or anyone who's had a bad start to the season and your team value isn't as high as you'd like, because let's get real, on these videos, most of the teams I talk about are quite expensive and you have to have made the right moves at the start of the season. So half these teams I've spoken about are more than 105 mil. So there's 2 teams I would recommend if you've only got 100 mil or about 100, 203 million in the bank. And those teams would be Verstappen, Perez, Alonso, Sargent, Hulkenberg with Red Bull and Aston Martin, and that will cost you 102.3 million. Again, it's basically just getting rid of Zhou and Stroll, bringing in Sargent and Hulkenberg, making that little bit of money. And like you can see, it's still a decent team. Obviously, you're losing about 10 to 20 points, but it'd still be a very good team to boost your value in the season and then maybe go on to one of the bigger teams. And then same thing, if you just started and you've got 100 million exactly, then replace Alonso with Stroll and that will cost you 100 million. Again, it's not the best team by all means, but it's a good starter team if you just started or you've had a bad start to the season and you need to rebound a bit. Let's finally talk about drivers and constructors to stay clear of. So first off with the constructors, any team that's not Mercedes, Ferrari, Aston Martin or Red Bull are not even worth batting an eye at. This is just because they won't get you enough points. Constructors are key in F1 Fantasy, so you don't want to go anywhere near them. And then with the drivers, Hamilton you don't want to go near unless you're using Limitless because he's too expensive. Same with Leclerc. Ocon too expensive. Stroll and Gasly are a better option in that position. Magnussen, again, too expensive, and Zhou and Tsunoda are better options. Even Sargent and Hulkenberg, I think, would be better options just because then it gives you more money to focus on bigger drivers who will get you more points. Norris, again, too expensive for the points he's getting you. Bottas, again, too expensive. Piastri, too expensive. Albon, too expensive. And De Vries just is not good enough, considering he is around the same price as Zhou. So, hey, that sums up the drivers I wouldn't go near, and that is the end of the video. I'd like to quickly go over my league and say who's done well in it, say where I am, show you my league details for if you want to join it, link in the description to all of my Twitter, to my Discord and the league, and basically shout out to the top 5, which is Ferrari Nice, Rivaldi, Sani, 2DA Max and GMV Racing. Well done all of you, and I know quite a few of you use Limitless, and a few of you used extra DRS, so well done because that was a very smart move from all of you. And I think that about wraps up the video. I hope you all enjoyed, like and subscribe, and hey, I'll see you in the next video later in this week.